Now, I want to go to the energy situation in this country, which continues to deteriorate. This afternoon, I looked at the latest figures and found that average wholesale power prices in New South Wales this month are 3.5 times higher than in December 2008, 15 years ago. What's changed in the grid? Well, state and federal governments have gone all in on renewables, which has led to the neglect of our ageing coal-fired power plants. Joining me to discuss this is an electrical engineer turned Liberal national member for North Queensland seat of Hinkler, Keith Pitt, who knows a lot more about our power infrastructure than Energy Minister Chris Bowen, who's never had a job outside of politics. Keith, did you like that introduction?
Mate, fantastic.
Look, Keith, there's no doubt wholesale power prices have at least tripled over the past 10, 15 years. What's driven this shocking rise and what impact is it having on not just the economy, but even on our national security?
Well, the short version is this. In New South Wales, the state government sold their coal-fired power station. In Victoria, they closed them and then refused to develop their own gas reserves, so there's a gas shortfall, hence driving up the price. And in Queensland, they're robbing the electricity consumer blind. They take more than $1 billion out of the electricity network into the government coffers every year. And then on top of that, I think they gave them something like $10 billion in an additional debt to prop up their own budget. And they're trying to replace it with something which is intermittent and unreliable and doesn't work. Don't forget, 500,000 additional Australians in the last 12 months who all want electricity. All of those things combined to give us the situation we're in now.
Yeah, I mean, we had that shocking situation yesterday in Sydney where we had the Energy Minister practically pleading for people, if you don't have to put the aircon on or your dryer or your dishwasher, we'd rather you didn't. And of course, they're trying to get us to drive EVs and then telling us we'd rather you didn't plug them in. So it's madness. The energy market operator, speaking of madness, has just brought forward the expected closure of our coal-fired power plants by about 5 years, I think it is. Meanwhile, there's warnings that Australia needs to double its rollout of new transmission lines by the end of the decade or risk rolling blackouts. Are we on the path to blackouts? I mean, we talk about it as being an option. How serious a threat do you think that is?
Oh, it's incredibly serious. And don't forget, AEMO forecast the potential of 60% increase in demand for electric vehicle chargers. And their statement today, and get this, is that you need to install almost 200 gigawatts of intermittent wind and solar, including rooftop solar, and about 74 gigawatts of dispatchable energy, whether it's pumped hydro or batteries or gas, to replace what is currently there, which is only 65. Now, this is because it is intermittent, it doesn't work, it averages about 30% capacity if you're lucky, and 10,000 kilometres plus of transmission. And yet somehow, Chris Bowen says with a straight face, this is cheaper, it will cost people less.
Yeah, it's quite incredible. And then on top of that, I mean, it's all right for us in the cities, we've got our problems, but then you've got farmers and people in regional communities who are concerned about the rollout of massive transmission towers. And that's before we talk about wind turbines and solar farms. And yet at the same time, the energy market operator is now warning we need even more transmission lines. And it's going to cost more billions of dollars. I mean, it really is madness.
Well, it's literally millions of hectares in terms of the footprint. Nobody wants a transmission line in their backyard, particularly HP. And yet, as part of this new plan, that's what's desperately needed, apparently, to connect everything up. So, you know, if you get a cyclone in the north, somehow you're going to run the power system from Victoria into Cairns and North Queensland, and that will all once again be cheaper. But I'll give you a hot tip. All those coal-fired power stations out there now, we will still need them in 10 or 15 years' time because things will just get in the way. Environmental approvals, cultural and heritage issues, people appealing and holding these up in the courts. And on top of that, you've got Labor funding organisations like the Environmental Defenders Office to shut down oil and gas projects that we actually need.
I mean, like me, you would have watched our political leaders from around the world. Chris Bowen was amongst them, giving themselves a standing ovation at the climate conference for agreeing that we need to phase out fossil fuels. Meanwhile, back here, as I said, in Sydney, we're being told, please don't use your air conditioner. Does Chris Bowen really believe that we can make this transition work, or is he really just sort of fingers crossed, hoping and, you know, maybe it'll all work out in the sweet by and by?
Oh, I think he's a true believer. There's no doubt about that. But these are not decisions based on engineering and economics. They really aren't. Because on top of all the costs, and the transmission costs aren't factored in yet, you've actually got to do things with frequency control and a thing called system strength, which makes sure that the network is stable. Now, a lot of that comes inherently in traditional generators, like coal-fired power stations and traditional hydro and gas. But you've actually got to pay for that with intermittent wind and solar because they've just got no strength to them. The idea that our economy will run on this, our nation will actually be safe and strong with this type of energy network, I just think it's folly.
Just quickly, divisions emerging within the Labor Party as the Australian Workers' Union and the Maritime Union call on the Commonwealth and states to support offshore gas. But then you've got Green activists, many of whom are on the PM's front bench, who don't want that. So who wins in that fight, the unions or the activists?
Well, what a crock. Don't listen to what they say, look at what they do. The Labor government is funding the Environmental Defender's Office with taxpayers' money to the tune of $2.4 million a year and $9 million up front in their first budget, and yet they say that they're all for the resources sector. The taxpayer is funding these activists. The unions want to stop it. Well, they should get on the phone and ring the minister and stop that money now. That'd be the first step.
Keith, I appreciate your time.